Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. I'm Shireen Bhan. We're in conversation with the Managing Director and Global CEO of Cipla, Umang Vohra. Given the focus that you just spoke of, especially as far as innovation is concerned, you said that you're speaking with the players to potentially bring MRNA technology to India. You're looking at the CAR-T opportunity as well. Any timelines by when you believe that this could start to have a meaningful impact as far as financials are concerned? And what kind of fresh investments are we expected to make in terms of betting on these new segments?
So we're looking at roughly 3 to 5 years as a minimum to have from concept to product. So we're looking at 3 to 5 years if we start today to when we could have a first product in India. And of course, for the regulated markets, it's going to be significantly beyond that. But our focus right now is all India for some of these products. And the type of investments would be, our assumptions say that it could be somewhere in the $50 to $100 million range. In terms of non-capex investments, and if you were to add capex, maybe another $50–70 million more. So completely within range of how we would look at our business and the investment cycle. It's not significantly beyond that.
Okay, so about 50 to 100 million non-capex, that's the kind of broad investment range that you're looking at. You brought up emerging markets as another engine of growth that you will focus on. What could the contribution be in terms of revenue over the next 3 to 5 years? What is it that you're working with in terms of the target?
So we've deep markets in South Africa. We've got good presence in some of the other markets of the emerging side of the world, but we're primarily looking at Brazil, we're looking at China, we're looking at South Africa. Within these set of markets, Australia, we call it an emerging market for us, but Australia is, hopefully will be a $100 million market for us pretty soon. We're looking at Brazil. China is a market that we believe the respiratory opportunity is fairly significant. I don't think we're going to do the China market as a market where we'd sell by ourselves, but through a partner. But we've identified these deep markets which hopefully have more stabler economies and less volatility. So it's going back in a sense to the entire classification of the same Brazil, South Africa, China. Deeper markets, larger number of people. Those are the markets that we're after. So I think the contribution from the emerging markets would stay. We're roughly about 30%, about 25% of our mix. That's probably going to stay at the same level of mix as we go forward. I think if it might dial down a bit because of the significant growth that we probably will see out of India and the US, but it's a very important third leg for us in our business strategy.
Since you're talking about building on a culture of innovation, which is going to be key to driving your business strategy, I also want to understand from you what changes you're making to ensure that the organization moves in that direction. Culturally, the changes that you're making to ensure that the business strategy is aligned with what's happening on the back end.
It's a great question. It's a great question, and we've been doing a lot of thinking about this. I think one of the first things we've realized is that our own culture and value statement has to have innovation as a central value. We have that, but what we don't have is we don't have what that innovation links back to. So what we've tried to look around, and we've come up with a terminology called pioneering, which is really about how we could take something that comes from Cipla beyond into the industry. And we said we have to pioneer a lot of these things, whether it's about bringing technologies into India and coming out with products, or even otherwise. So that's the first thing that we've done. We've started speaking about innovation internally significantly. We've also started talking about how we could continue to be pioneers for the industry, for the people going forward. So that's the first cultural change. The second is, we're trying to look at, we spend a lot more into innovation. We're beginning to have a relook at how we center around innovation. So for example, we're okay now to have decentralized teams sitting in the US, sitting in Europe, where we believe a significant innovation quotient exists, right? It's very difficult to build innovation ecosystems in a new place. So for example, for a lot of innovators who are based out of San Francisco, a lot of innovators who are based in Europe, it's very difficult to attract them to come and work in India. So what we're trying to do is to create a structure where They primarily exist in their countries, but and we perhaps open a few decentralized centers for innovation around the places that they live, and try and merge that back with our mother organization within India. So I think those are some of the things that we're looking at. The other thing is alliances. I think a lot of innovation happens outside a single lab. It happened outside this lab for a large number of pharmaceutical companies in the world as well, and it's the same for us. So the right alliances, the right structures, the right people in decentralized locations, culturally espousing certain values, all of that's coming together. It's not an easy fix. It's very different to innovate versus very different to be a generic company, and you can't begin to exclude either of the two. The generic company is what's going to pay for innovation for us. So, and the generic company's mentality is structured around cost and access. And the innovation mentality is really about being able to get products which are ahead of the curve, which has the patient at the center and the ability to satisfy the patient need. So there are two organizations, and we have to properly structure them, marry them in order to get the best outcome for the company.
No, I understand that, and it's interesting that you're talking about building alliances in order to be able to create these innovation ecosystems. But Umang, what is that going to mean in terms of spends? What is the current spend, and what do you anticipate the spend to be over the next few years as you enhance your focus on innovation?
We're currently about 6%, and I think that going forward, two things would happen. We'd obviously continue to be 6% of a certain base that hopefully would grow on the top line. But we are also thinking of increasing our innovation spends to close to 7 to 8%. And I don't think in the way we look at our business model today that we can ever be higher than 8%, considering the needs of our stakeholders and what we think we can productively spend on. So I do think innovation spends in the company will increase on the R&D side from 6% to closer to between 7 and 8. But we're also innovating on our business model. The whole digital wave is effectively trying to allow us to mitigate the increase of inflation in the economy. So digital is wonderful because on the business model side, it allows you to get into lots of adjacencies at much cheaper cost. So the cost of acquiring a customer or the cost of detailing to a doctor on a digital platform is almost 1/3 or 1/4 the cost that it would take for a usual platform. So I think we're trying to innovate across not just the labs, but also our business model through the digital engine.
Yeah, and I think that is a journey that many companies and corporations are on at this point in time. Umang, I want to understand from you, since you talked about focusing on growth largely organically, but you're also open to inorganic acquisitions. What could be the potential gaps that you hope that inorganic growth will plug?
So I'm not sure, Shireen, that we have a number that we have an internal set of numbers that we want to get to, but I don't think we look at where we want to get to be satisfied because we have an X amount coming through an acquisition. I don't think we've planned our business that way, but I would think that we would want at least 10 to 15% of our revenues, let's say over 5 years later, to be from sources which we have acquired in this 5-year period. So yes, it's not going to be significant, but at the same time, I do think those acquisitions will bring new capabilities. I do think those acquisitions will allow us to be deeper either in markets or in territories in India. And I do think those acquisitions will be consumer heavy, whether they're in diagnostics or they're even in consumer brands that go deeper in the countries that we operate in.
You talked about diagnostics, and this is getting to be a very, very interesting space. Lots of activity, lots of action, not just from the incumbents, but from plenty of startups who are looking at getting into this. Your peers exploring this opportunity as well, whether it's Lupin or Torrent. How big of an aspiration is the diagnostic business for you?
So, I think it's an extremely big enabler for our business in India and some of the emerging markets. And let me explain what our version of diagnostics is. We're not in the business of setting up diagnostic chains. We're not in the business of setting up diagnostic centers because we think that those are highly capital intensive and fast commoditizing markets. But we are in the business of providing or trying to create solutions for diagnosis in doctors' rooms and chambers, because that's where a large chunk of India, starting with the tier 1 to the tier 4 cities, goes to get diagnosed and treated. And what happens usually is in this patient journey is when they go to this doctor, they're then sent to another hospital or another lab or another place to get tested. And we think a lot of people drop off because of that. They either don't get tested, or the costs that they spend in getting this test significantly increases. So our objective is to bring this diagnosis to the doctor's room and the doctor's chamber as phase 1. And as phase 2, it's really to take this entire thing to the patients directly. So which means if a patient can blow into a phone and gets an opinion of what their lung health looks like, or if a patient can look into the phone and gets a scan done which tells them what their blood pressure is and how it's behaved over the past week or so, I think that's the type of diagnosis that we are after, which brings it more centered to the people, either to the doctors or the patients themselves.
Okay, so not looking at foraying into the diagnostic chain or diagnostic center business. Umang, I kind of have an inkling of what your response to this question is going to be, but I'm going to ask it nevertheless because this keeps coming around. The possibility of Cipla being put on the block, being up for sale. You know, the promoters have a little over 33% stake in the company. You know, it keeps coming back as a possibility and as a potential or an eventuality. Has there been any conversation with the promoters on this aspect?
No, none with the promoters, none with the board. In fact, we're at a stage where we want to be the consolidator. So there's been no conversation either with the promoters or with the board on this aspect at all.
Well, that's it then on the record with Umang Vohra. We are going to take a break here on CNBC-TV18 and be back with you in a moment with a lot more.